Welcome and or welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah Blackwell and today I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite books of 2022. So I had a lot of difficulty building this list because I had so many amazing reads this year. I had a wonderful reading year, and luckily I was able to help narrow down this list by doing a separate list for my favorite romances of the year. I will have that linked down below in the description if you want to watch that. But I definitely had a difficult time making this list. I did put it in order of like favorite to most favorite, I should say. It's not like least favorite, right? Because it's still in your top of the year. But I have a top 10 here, and I do have a couple of honorable mentions, but I did want to have it like a top 10. So I'm going to start with some of my honorable mentions first. Before we get into this video, I just want to let you know all of my social media is linked down below in the description, including my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have not already subscribed, I would love to have you do so. Make sure to click the like button and comment down below and let me know what your favorite book this year was. So my first honorable mention for this video is going to be This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but this is a science fiction, like a sci-fi romance, I should say. I mean, it's more sci-fi, but this is a romance. You could say it's a sapphic romance, but technically it's not, because these are like, at least one of these characters is like artificial intelligence. But this is a sci-fi book about like this time war, and we have these two warriors for these two different factions of the universe that are fighting over the threads of time. That's the best way I can describe this. Now, they basically start communicating via letters to each other, trying to like one-up each other, and they end up falling in love. So this story is written in an epistolary format, and it was actually the first epistolary novel I've ever read, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Did I understand everything that was happening in this book? No, 100% I did not, but that wasn't necessary. This book is more about pure vibes and amazing writing. That in itself was beautiful. The love story was also beautiful. Did I have to understand exactly what they were doing? The scenes and depictions that were being described? No, I did not. I did not 100% understand those. It's very abstract, so you have to be okay with walking into an abstract novel. If you're going to read this, you're not going to understand what's going on, and that's not the point of it. But if you're okay with that, if you can go into this book open-minded and know you're not going to understand everything, then I would definitely recommend this book. I really loved it. It was totally unique. I've never read anything like this. Another honorable mention I have is Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the 3rd book in the Daevabad series, and I absolutely adored this series. This is an epic political fantasy trilogy that is set in mostly in Daevabad, which is a made-up city that's in the Middle East. And it's set, if you actually look at it, she bases her fantasy map on our actual geography of the world. So this is technically, I think Daevabad is set in Afghanistan, and the story actually starts out in Egypt. So the first book starts out with Nari, who is a thief with a little bit of magic, and she accidentally summons a djinn. The story goes from there. She learns that she has some heritage that she was unaware about, and she goes with Dara to the magical city of Daevabad, and the story goes from there, and it's epic, it's political, there's a lot of political intrigue, there's a little bit of a romance in here as well, and this was the final book in the series, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I wish I could have included it in my top 10 of the year, but I just had so many amazing reads, like I said, that I couldn't. I mean, I had more than 10 like top tier 5-star books, so it just wasn't gonna happen. But I absolutely adored this. I was really happy to be able to finish out this series. I have not read River of Silver. S.A. Chakraborty came out with that this year, and I even had an arc of it, and I just didn't get around to reading it. But I love this book. Gave it 5 stars. Wish I could have included it on my top 10, so here it is now. I feel like people are going to be really surprised by seeing this book as an honorable mention and not on my top 10 of the year. But that book was Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. Yet another final book in a epic fantasy trilogy. I was really happy to finish out at least 5 or 6 epic fantasy series this year, or at least get up to date in them. But anyway, this was the third book in the First Law trilogy, the First Law trilogy. So the first trilogy in the First Law universe is called the First Law trilogy. That can be confusing sometimes, but I really liked this book. I really liked this whole series. It is a character-driven grimdark series with some really good humor. The characters in this series are all a little bit good and a lot of bad. They do awful things. These are super morally gray characters. This is not a plot-driven series. I thought that the final book was amazing. The reveals were really cool, and I'm really looking forward to continuing on in the world of First Law. I believe that Catch Up Book Club is doing, their next series is going to be the First Law universe, so I'll be able to kind of watch along as they read the first trilogy, and then hopefully I'll be reading the standalones with them, and then the final trilogy in the First Law universe as well. The first book in the series starts out with 3 different characters. You have a barbarian, you have a torturer, and then you have this duelist who is just scum of the earth. And they all have their awful traits. The whole first book you spend them just following them as they kind of come together for a quest. So the first book is very prequel-esque, but I really liked it. It's just you getting to know the characters. So I guess that's my synopsis for the first book, because there really isn't a plot. That's all I can give you. And then obviously I can't tell you much about the third book because spoilers. But yeah, I really like this. If you like character-driven books, if you like grimdark books, especially epic fantasy with a good hint of humor. I love Joe Abercrombie's humor. I totally recommend it. I feel like Joe Abercrombie's writing is if George R. Martin and Brandon Sanderson had a writing baby. That's really how I feel like it is, except for without a Sanderslam. Accessibility wise, I think it's more accessibility and lighthearted than George R. Martin, yet somehow more disgusting and grimdark at the same time. Definitely recommend this. Once again, shocked that it didn't make my top 10 of the year. So finally, what did make my top 10 of the year? The first book I have here, the book that takes the number 10 spot, is Into the Drowning Deep by Mara Grant. This book is a horror sci-fi. It is the only sci-fi in the top 10, also the only horror in the top 10, and it's a total mashup. A lot of people say this is a horror book, but I say it's 50% sci-fi, 50% horror. It's really got a lot of science in here. This book is about a crew that goes to research mermaids and the existence of mermaids in the Mariana Trench, and horror ensues because they do find the mermaids find them, and the mermaids ain't so nice. This is a really good horror with great writing, great characters. It was wonderful. I would love to read more Mara Grant in the future. Mara Grant is actually a pen name for Shauna McGuire. It's the name she writes her horror books under. And she also has a zombie series that I'm totally interested in picking up. Maybe this fall. We'll see. This book I cannot stop thinking about. The way Mara Grant examines humanity through these scientists' lenses is really interesting. The way she has these scientists explaining their jobs to the other scientists in a way to teach the reader instead of info dumping is amazing as well. I just love the way that she did this book, and I keep thinking about it. It makes me think a lot about humanity, about how we have developed over time, about the world. It makes you think about a lot of things, and I love a book that will make me think, and this did that. I don't think anyone will be surprised by seeing a book in this series in my top 10 of the year, but that is going to be Ruin by John Gwynne. This is the third book in the Faithful and the Fallen Quartet by John Gwynne, and this is an epic fantasy, epic political fantasy that is very military fantasy. There are a lot of battles, a lot of action in this series, and this is the third book, and it was definitely my favorite. This is the only book in the series that I gave 5 stars. The first book I gave 4 stars, and Valor I gave 4.5, and then I actually was a little bit disappointed by Wrath. I gave it 4 stars, still a good rating, but it didn't end and come together the way I guess I wanted it to. But Ruin, I have to say, was just an impeccably written epic fantasy story that left me like heartbroken so many times. It was gut-wrenching, it was beautifully written, it was emotional, it was evocative. It was just a wonderful book. This is the third book in the series, like I said, so I can't really tell you anything that happens in this book. But in Malice, we follow a cast of characters as a multi-POV epic fantasy story while they are basically preparing themselves for the coming of this god war. They're realizing this god war is coming, this ancient war between giants and humans and these gods that are basically using humanity as puppets. It's really interesting. It's done in a unique way. A lot of people like to talk about the way that it flips the chosen one trope, and while it does, I prefer not to highlight that because I think that gives an expectation that that flip happens early or that it's a certain kind of flip that it may or may not be. But anyway, this is a really interesting series. I 100% recommend it if you like political or military fantasy. It has got that classic medieval, like Celtic inspired feel. And I cannot wait to pick up more John Gwynne. I want to pick up his Norse-inspired fantasy series next with Shadow of the Gods. Number 8 on my list is the only thriller on this list, and that's The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This is a super, super dark and triggering thriller. Make sure to check out the trigger warnings before you go into this book. It gave me a little bit of a reading slump. I don't think I picked anything up for 2 days after I finished this book. This is about a woman who, when she was in college, she kind of got intertwined with a cult, like a small cult. And she's grown up, she's gotten out of that life, and she hears that one of her friends that she knew back in college has killed herself. And she hears about this through a podcast that is ran by an old friend of hers. And she and this friend decide to investigate, and the story goes from there. She gets intertwined with a cult again, and this is a sex cult, and the themes in this book include a lot of gaslighting and feminine rage, and obviously there's a lot of sexual assault discussed in here, and control of women, and misogyny, and a lot of really difficult topics. It's done in a beautiful way, and it has stuck with me. I will probably reread this book at some point, but this book was just impeccably written. It was beautiful, gut-wrenching, and really hard to read. I say like it's the best thriller I read this year. It was, 6 stars basically. Did I enjoy it? Not quite, if that makes sense. But if you want an impactful thriller, this is definitely one to pick up. Just make sure that you are in the right headspace for it. Next I have Book of Gothel by Mary McMine, and this is the 7th spot on my list. This is described as a Rapunzel retelling, but it's more of a Dame Gothel origin story, and it's definitely not a book that's for everyone. It's very atmospheric, character driven, and very slow paced. So if you do not like slow paced, character driven, atmospheric books such as The Bear and the Nightingale or Uprooted, then this may not be the book for you. I try to say that first before describing this because the synopsis is so interesting and so many people are captivated by it, but I do know that it's just not for everyone, and I hate for books that are just not for everyone to get like slammed on Goodreads because they are not described right or the publishers did not do a better job with advertising the book correctly. The point is, this is a Dame Gothel origin story. You follow Hailweiss, and early on in the book, her mother passes away. Her mother follows the old ways of magic and basically like origins of like pagan or Wiccanism or what have you. And this is set in Germany, and after she passes away, she goes on a little bit of a journey, and she ends up wanting to learn about her mother's old way religion and the ways of magic, and it's about her trying to find those things, but the struggle is real, especially in paganism. Trying to find answers or being given explanation is very hard because pagans have been so brutalized and hunted, literally hunted, throughout the generations. And so this book is a lot of discussion of Christianity versus paganism, of feminism. It's a coming of age story about Dame Gothel as a child, Helvice, and then her growing up. There's a little bit of a love story in there as well, but it does not necessarily have it's not necessarily a romance because we don't have a perfect HEA, right? I definitely recommend this for those who love historical fantasies that are slow paced, like Catherine Arden or Juliet Marillet. And I absolutely adored this book. I just thought it was beautifully written, and I loved the themes that were being discussed in it. Number 6 on this list, I have a book that I read just very recently, and that's Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a cozy fantasy about an orc who sets up a coffee shop, falls in love with her employee, and it's a slice of life fantasy novel. It even says here on the cover, a novel of high fantasy and low stakes. If you've been on BookTube long or watched BookTube long, or at all really in the last year, you've probably heard of this book because this has been so many people's favorite books. And I am, much like so many other booktubers, I adored this. I loved it. It gave me all of the feels. It gave me those intimate moments that you love, in between plot points in a book that you don't always get enough of. This was just basically 100% those. Those intimate character moments, the in-between moments, beautiful descriptions of coffee and cinnamon rolls and the town, and a beautiful love story. And our main character goes through a search, basically trying to find herself and figure out what she's supposed to be doing, and working hard and experiencing disappointments and just the real world. And it's just beautiful, and I absolutely adored it. Now we are down to the top 5. So number 5 on this list, Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillet. This was a 5-star prediction for me, and I was absolutely correct. Apparently, this has definitely been my favorite Juliet Marillet that I have read. It was beautifully written. This is a fairy tale retelling that I read for Once Upon a Readathon. This is about Sorsha, and she and her brothers are cursed. She can no longer speak until she can break her brother's curse, and her brothers have been cursed to be swans, and she has to go through these really challenging feats, and she experiences some really dark stuff. Make sure to check trigger warnings if you need them. There is a sexual assault in this book, and it is really hard to read. There is also a beautiful love story in this book, and it is technically a fantasy romance, but I would say more a coming of age story of Sorsha finding her own self, finding her strength, overcoming and doing things that basically no other male character in this book could have done. And it was beautiful. The love that she has for her brothers and her family, the love that she finds, the found family in this book as well. It's gorgeous. It's beautifully written. It's atmospheric. It's a historical fantasy set in the Middle Ages, and I absolutely adored it. I will forever keep picking up Juliet Marillet books because I've never been disappointed by one. Another historical fantasy on this list. I think that this is telling me something. If I'm looking at this, I do have a lot of historical fantasy on this list. And I think I want to pick up more definitely in the coming year. There's some famous historical fantasy authors that I would like to pick up that I've not read anything from, and I want to continue on reading from some historical fantasy authors that I've read from already, some this year. Anyway, the point is, number 4 on this list is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This is the second book in the Winter Night trilogy. The Bear and the Nightingale is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it twice, and then I picked up this book finally. I still have to read Winter of the Witch, but I absolutely adored this book. Catherine Arden in this series has a way of making you feel the cold, feel the atmosphere, feel the tension, feel the dangers surrounding you when it gets that cold, just the natural dangers. And then you have the magical dangers as well in this, and the political dangers we come into in The Girl in the Tower. This is actually set in Moscow, and there are political dangers as well. The first book in this series follows Vasilisa, and the whole series follows Vasilisa, but the first book follows her when she's a girl, and her mother passes away, and her father remarries, and her stepmother is extremely religious. She's a Catholic, and she wants to kind of get rid of all of the old ways. And Vasilisa can see magical creatures like the domovoi and other magical creatures in the forest as well. And she can connect with the old ways of the spirits. And there's also a little bit of like a romance in the series as well. Anyway, so the first book follows Vasilisa and this journey of trying to be her own girl, her own woman, while battling the takeover that Catholicism is doing over her house and her land. And she is also battling the bear as well, which you will see. And so it's not got a large plot. It's definitely more character driven and atmosphere driven. And so is the second book. But I would say there's probably more plot in the second book. I absolutely adore this. I love where the series is going, and I'm looking forward to picking up the third book. Getting into the top 3. Okay, number 3 on my list is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This book is the first book in the Live Ship Traders series, which is the second trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings. This series follows a family of live ship traders, and they're called the Vestra family, and they this book starts when their ship is about to quicken, which is when a live ship basically gains sentience. And in this world, the live ships that have gained sentience, they're faster than regular ships. They are safer. They are basically impossible to take over. Pirates don't usually even try to steal from a live ship or to steal a live ship because it's basically just not done. Live ships can also navigate the Rainwild River, and they're the only ones that can. And so we follow this family that is going through this inner struggle, this turmoil when the father passes away, because Althea, one of our main characters, is supposed to inherit the ship, but instead she does not. Her brother-in-law does. And so there's going to be all of this family turmoil, familial dynamics that are really interesting. And then we also do follow a pirate as well who wants to become king of the pirates. The pirates don't have a king. They don't want a king, but he wants to be the king of the pirates. And he thinks in order to do so, the easiest way to do so would be to capture a live ship. So we follow all these different characters and we meet some live ships, and it's just really cool, really well written. The emotions and the way that Robin Hobb can forever tug at your heartstrings and make you feel so connected to characters, and the way she allows her characters to struggle so immensely. There's just something addictive about her writing, and I just love this book so much. I don't think I've ever given a book by Robin Hobb not 5 stars. I don't think so. This was so good. Number 2 on this list, and I sometimes think that number 2 and 1 are a little bit interchangeable depending on the day, but today this is number 2. And that is Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This is technically a novella, and it's kind of hard to describe this book. It's a whimsical magical realism book about this guy who's one of his parents passes away, so he goes back home for the funeral. And when he does so, he makes a stop at what he and his friend called the ocean at the end of the lane. It's actually a pond. And he starts remembering all these things that happened when he was a child. And I guess that doesn't sound very interesting, but if you've read anything by Neil Gaiman before, you know that something as simple as that can become so much more, and it does. And I'm ready to reread this already, and I only read it a few months ago. I can't get this book out of my head. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. If you read this book, I 100% recommend listening to the audiobook because Neil Gaiman's voice is just pretty spectacular, and he does a wonderful job as an audiobook narrator as well. The writing is beautiful. The way things are described, and you just don't quite know what's real or what's not. And it's so interesting the way that he describes our main character's struggles as a child, and the way he describes evil and what it is. And I just absolutely adored this book. Neil Gaiman isn't for everyone, but he definitely is for me. And finally, hopefully this video wasn't too long, the number one spot. This book, surprisingly, I wasn't sure if it was still going to be number one. I know you've heard me talk about this if you've been watching my channel for a while. But this was the first book that I read this year. This was the very first book that I read in 2022. Technically, I started it at the end of 2021, at the end of December, and then finished most of it in 2022 in early January. And that is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is a self-published epic fantasy standalone novel inspired by Japan. And this book is amazing. It follows a mother and son duo. It's multi-POV'd, so we follow the mother, and she used to be this force to be reckoned with. She could wield a sword like no other. She was a baddie. And she now is a stay-at-home mom. Her husband is the badass with an ice sword, and she has put her sword away. She's buried it, literally buried it under the floorboards, and no one knows it's there. And we also follow her son, who is trying to live up to the warrior he's supposed to be, and he's trying to be everything his father wants him to be. And in all of this happening, we have this empire who is lying to its civilians. It's corrupt, and we have an invading force coming. And in this place on the Sword of Kaigen, which is actually a peninsula in Kaigen, this is where the big bad warriors of the country are, and where they train. And it was amazing. There is family dynamics, there is heartbreak, there is emotion. There are some really difficult things to read about in here. There is action, and the epic battles and the action are amazing. I mean, we have elemental magic in this book. So the invading forces have a different kind of magic. Different people have different kinds of magic. And those on the Sword of Kaigen have this ice magic. And they can control water. And they have these ice swords. It's so cool. It's so cool. It's beautifully written. It is gut-wrenching. It's everything. It's everything I could have wanted. And I'm happy that my favorite book of the year was a self-published fantasy. I want to read more self-published fantasy. But I absolutely adored this book. And I totally recommend it if you like epic fantasy, especially Asian-inspired epic fantasy. I love to see a mother winning it all kind of thing, like a mother being a badass, and it's what I love to see. I think it's really cool. Not enough fantasy does it, and I want to see more of it. So there you have it. Those were my top 10 and then some favorite books of the year. I hope you guys liked this video. If you liked it, make sure to click the like button. If you haven't already subscribed, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and or what your favorite book of 2022 was. If you want to follow me on social media, all of my social media is linked down below, including my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter. Until next time, fellow readers, keep reading and living your best life.
Strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts.